Hello bakers, if you're watching this right now, you're watching the replay, so thank you so much for joining us. And welcome to today's episode of the Dough Doctor. I'm your host and baking expert, Chef Colette. So welcome, let's get started. I have a great show planned for us today. I'm super excited about it. But first, I need to start with an apology. So Mrs. C wrote me, she DM'd me about the shortbread. And she had actually, and this happened to another one of our bakers, I think it was Pistol Packing Mama, but I'm not sure. You know, I got a lot going on in my head, but I think it was. So I had two bakers try the shortbread recipe from a few weeks ago. They used a high percentage butter and the cookies didn't set properly. So I have to say, I need to go back and rework the shortbread formula for the higher percentage butter. Our normal butter that we buy in the market is 80%, but if you buy one of the European butters, it'll be more 82, 82.6%, sometimes creeping up to 83, and that extra fat really can affect our outcomes. That's it. And also, the plumbing right here is all fixed. I'm very grateful to the plumbers who came and fixed it. And again, one more apology. I apologize for having to cancel the show last week, but the sinks were belching dirty water, and there was just, I know the show must go on, but last week it just couldn't. You would have watched, well, it would have been comical, but not very educational from a baking point of view. So I'm going to start with questions. So again, thank you for joining. Please put in the comments, what are you baking this weekend for Easter or Passover? And if you have baking questions, because we haven't been together for 2 weeks, drop them in the comments and I will periodically stop and check for questions. All right. So I had well, first of all, I want to shout out our bakers. Our baker Rico sent me a lovely post of her Pan de Cristal, which is a beautiful yeasted bread. Its first cousin would be ciabatta. Pan de Cristal is 100% hydration, bakers. You are pouring that dough onto the pan. And she sent me a gorgeous photo, a beautiful, beautiful bake of her Pan de Cristal with its big open crumb structure. Because as we know with our work from working with hydration and yeasted doughs, the more hydrated our doughs, the more open the crumb structure. So Rico, thank you for that. Michaela sent some beautiful photos of strawberry pastries she was making. Unfortunately, that photo didn't stick. So I wanted to go back again and get more details. So Michaela, I'm sorry that my description is a little stunted. If you would resend, that would be great. And then the last beautiful photo I just got from our baker Sherry. She sent a photo of a cherry pie with a perfect sherry. That lattice crust was beautifully done. A cherry pie that looked like it was destined for the oven. Maybe an Easter bake in the process. Oh, I do see from Pistol Packing Mama. Hot cross buns for yesterday. With my snafu, we may not get to hot cross buns for a while. So Pistol Packing Mama, I'm so glad you did. And that's great. All right. Because after this week, we have to decide which direction we're going for demo. For today's demo, I'm going to throw back to last week and I'm going to show you how to roll the lemon sponge roll for Passover. And it gives me an opportunity to sort of talk about some ingredients that you bakers, all of us bakers, don't use all the time and why they're there. Because I would imagine if you do Passover baking, maybe you've done Passover baking for years, your mom did, your grandma did, and they always use the same things. But why? Why were those two ingredients always there. And what were their functions? Because if we know more, the more we know about ingredient function bakers, the smarter we are, and the better we bake. I totally believe. All right, so let's jump into questions really quick. I had another question. This question seems to come up every week. I'm sure my regular followers of the show could answer it in unison. If you were a live audience, I'd just have you shout it out. The question: what's the difference between active dry yeast and instant yeast? But since we always have new folks joining, and I thank you so much for joining our live, I'm going to answer it quickly and efficiently. So active dry yeast and instant yeast, they're yeast and they work in the same way. When they're mixed into a dough, they get hydrated, they begin to feed off the starches in the flour, they get nutrition, and they create, as a result of that hydration and nutrition, carbon dioxide gas. And that's what makes our yeasted doughs rise. The difference between active dry and instant is active dry has a coating around it, a coating made of nothing nefarious, just dormant yeast cells and a protein fragment, a very important protein fragment called glutathione. And the only way to dissolve that outer coating so the live yeast cells can swim out and begin to get hydrated and get a good lunch and create that carbon dioxide gas is by hydrating that yeast, dissolving that yeast in liquid that's at least 90 degrees. Instant yeast is a little bit more concentrated than active dry, and it can go in with the dry ingredients and work reasonably well. But as we've discussed on the program when we take our deep dives into yeast, it really is a good idea to hydrate your instant yeast in the liquid from the recipe, just like you do your active dry. Even though it doesn't have that coating, give it a little bit of a drink so that it can hydrate, just like us. I know I say it all the time. When we're getting ready to work out, sometimes a couple sips of water gives us a better workout. It's the same thing for that instant yeast. So that answers that question. Now, I had a very unusual question, and this came from one of our bakers who was taking a deep dive into baking books from the 70s, the 80s. That was pretty much it, the 70s and the 80s. A little bit of a retro cookbook reading. And his question came about baker's ammonia. Now, baker's ammonia was also known way back in the day as horn salt. And baker's ammonia, you can order it from King Arthur. I'm sure Amazon has it as well, because Amazon has everything. Baker's ammonia predates baking soda and baking powder. It produces carbon dioxide gas, just like those two do, and it is best suited, in fact, it should be used in small units, and that's baker's speak for like cookies, or little pâte choux, eclairs and cream puffs. Not big, nothing like cake, but anything that has a low moisture content, like a cookie, or something like pâte choux. As a matter of fact, back in the day, a pinch of baker's ammonia was always added to pâte choux batches, because it works really quickly once it's exposed to heat and moisture, and it would give the pâte choux a lovely lift. All right? It is made in a lab these days. Back in the day, like in the 1830s, 1820s, I'm not going to elaborate on how it was made, but just to let you know, it made the old-fashioned way of making baker's ammonia makes the production of gelatin look friendly. But now, if you buy it from King Arthur or Amazon because you want to give it a try, it's made in a lab. It's potassium bicarbonate, something like that. Aluminum, whatever. So here's the deal. If you like crisp cookies, or you like your cookies to stay crisp in a tin, substitute baker's ammonium 1:1 for the baking soda in the recipe. But there is a smell that comes from the oven. It has a faint smell of ammonia, so you want to make sure your kitchen window is open, that completely dissipates after baking and leaves no flavor. So that was a very adventurous question from our baker, and I appreciate that. I believe it was our baker, Chef Daniel, who has asked me several times to really talk about what this chemical leavener is, rather old-fashioned, but still in use today in commercial production. All right, there you go. That was pretty much questions for today. I'm going to just reach over because I have this terribly long table right now. I'm in the market for a kitchen table that's a little bit less long, so I can set up, I can be a little bit closer to you guys. But I'm just going to see what were the questions. Do I have any questions? Oh, yes. Flour doesn't go bad. All right. So I have a question. This is a great question from one of our bakers. We are making matzah, but whole wheat. Can flour go bad? It was bitter. Yes. Flour, well, yes and no. It doesn't go bad in that it's going to make you sick. What happens is it goes off. So whole wheat flour, which is the entire wheat grain, the whole top of the wheat grain ground up. Remember, it has that wheat germ in it, which is about 2% of the overall grain. And the wheat germ is basically, its job is to be the food for a new baby plant. But we pick the wheat, we grind the wheat, so the wheat germ is full of oil and B vitamins and fat. Now, again, it's only 2%, so don't think like you're getting fat in whole wheat bread. You're not. But what happens is that fat goes rancid. And it goes rancid relatively quickly when your whole wheat flour is stored at room temperature. What do I mean by relatively quickly? A couple of months. So that's why I always recommend buy your whole wheat flour and store it in the freezer or in the refrigerator. I store mine in the freezer. Where is it? Right now I'm working through this bag of Arrowhead Mills organic stone ground wheat flour, and it doesn't stay at room. I mean, I pull it out, I use it, it goes back in the freezer because that is a terrible, terrible flavor. So I'm sorry that happened to you, but it won't make you sick. It's just gone rancid and it's not very pleasant. So pick up a fresh bag, make your matzah. They'll be nutty and delicious, and then throw the excess flour in the freezer. Great question, thank you. All righty, one more quick check for questions. Nope, we're good. I think, wait. That was it. All right, awesome. So now I'm going to go into my demo. So with last week's plumbing debacle, I was able to put the recipe for the Passover lemon sponge roll on the website at bakingwithcolette.com. So no waiting this week. You can go right to it. Now, in the recipe on the website, I baked it in a jelly roll pan. And it was a little on the thick side, but it was fine. It worked out really well, and it's super delicious. But bakers, for demo, I baked it again. Same exact formula, but I baked it in a half sheet pan. A half sheet pan is 13 by 18. Let me grab the jelly roll pan to show you the difference. So see the difference between these two pans? So of course, the same amount of batter is going to be thicker, however you want to do it. But I just wanted to show you that you have options. Now, a Passover sponge cake is traditionally baked in a tube pan, same kind of pan we'd use for angel food cake, but not everybody has one. Back in the day, everybody had an angel food cake pan because angel food cake was so popular, and bakers, we need to bring it back. But all things considered, it's 2023 and not everybody has a tube pan. That's the one with the straight sides and usually little feet, because when we bake sponge cakes, thick sponge cakes, they have to be cooled upside down so they don't deflate. Anyway, I wanted to make sure that the sponge roll was really accessible for you, so I baked it as a jelly roll. And if you go on the internet, there you see them, Passover sponge baked as jelly roll, filled with really amazing things like strawberries and whipped cream. The one I did for the website had lemon curd. I took out the butter and I used margarine that was kosher. A lot of the commercial margarines are kosher. Vegan butters, not so much. So if that's important to you, you want to use a dairy-free butter, and you want to make sure if kosher is important to you in your baking, of course, look for that little seal. So for this one, I'm really happy with how it turned out. And instead of the flour in the traditional sponge cake, I used a combination of matzah cake meal, which is matzah, which fully baked matzah, ground up, but ground really fine. More fine. Like, we couldn't get it this fine. It's the same consistency as flour. Even if you put it in your Vitamix, the heat of the Vitamix motor would affect the grind because the motor has to work so hard to get the product this fine. Let me show you. See, look, it's just like flour. So that's matzah cake meal. There's no sugar added, no flavorings. It's just finely, super fine ground matzah. And then the other, but, and I want you guys to think about this because I know you're a very creative group. When you're trying to, if you have a big idea and you are substituting for flour and you use a product that's fully baked like this matzah cake meal or graham crackers, I was just thinking about how I've gone off the rails making graham cracker, macarons, and all sorts of things. If the product is baked, it's not going to absorb any more moisture. And that is why in my lead up, I talked about how Passover sponge cake recipes usually had potato starch and matzah cake meal, because the potato starch is super absorbent. So there's always more of this than of this, but the amount of this takes up that absorption factor so that there's structure to the cake. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so good. Now, I'm going to ask something in the comments for my jelly roll bakers. Yes or no, do you get upset if you're rolling your jelly roll and it cracks? Oh, and then I see Pistol Packing Mama. Will the flour smell off as well? Yes, especially if you got a good smeller. You got to stick your nose in that bag and it's just not going to smell right. It's gonna smell off, all right? But again, we hate to waste, so just take that note that I gave you and store your whole wheat in the freezer. I've had whole wheat flour, not now because I've worked through it, but I've had a bag of whole wheat, like if I buy a big 5-pound King Arthur bag, for a year, especially during the pandemic when I was scratching around here, like a little mouse. It took me a year to work through a 5-pound bag of whole wheat flour. So it will last, just properly store it. Okay. So life of irony is like, yes, cracks in jelly roll, much worse than cracks in cheesecake. Okay, so here's where I'm going to tell you, my bakers, please relax. There are no jelly roll crack police. One thing that might be, there's a couple things that make your jelly rolls crack, and it is not you, but a decision. If you bake them thinner, they tend not to crack. If you bake a thicker jelly roll, they're going to crack. And if there's no fat in the recipe, and usually there isn't, like a little melted butter or margarine, I've been thinking with Passover baking, I've been thinking non-dairy. Without that fat to grease the gluten strands, the cake has more of a tendency to crack. But here's the thing, your cake is still delicious. We can cover it up with powdered sugar. We can cover it up with whipped cream. We can make an Italian or Swiss meringue. Find our creme brulee torches and caramelize that and make it really beautiful and sexy. So I don't want you guys to ever feel bad if you get a crack. The same thing with cheesecake. That's what fresh fruit is for. So please, please, my bakers, we're gonna, super positive vibes, okay? I mean, I know I get disappointed too, but we gotta break it down. And that's when we understand the baking processes and we have we understand our ingredients, then we don't have to beat ourselves up so bad. All right, so let me get this sucker out of the pan. I have a very important, it sounds like I've got some passionate jelly rollers in the audience today. And then, and I want to show you this one important thing that can be missed in a New York second. So, and pistol packing mama, I'm with you, yep. But I get it. Ooh, that inner baking perfectionist can be crazy. All right. And the other thing I don't do, and we didn't, and I know I have some former cordon bleu folks in the audience, the one thing I don't do that you see a lot of cookbooks talk about, older baking books, is rolling it right away. There was a lot of anxiety back in the day about rolling the jelly roll cakes or sponge rolls. We'll be elegant and call them sponge rolls quickly, almost to build muscle memory into the cake by rolling it fast. I mean, that's a perfectly good practice, but you can also let the cake cool. You can freeze the cake and then roll it at a later, freeze it flat and roll it at a later time. But there are a couple of things. Now, one thing, the top of any cake, this top right here that I'm taking my finger and scraping off, I'm showing you right there. This is called the bloom of the cake. There won't be a quiz later, but this very top, almost like the first layer of skin, is called the bloom of the cake. And that will stick to your parchment paper because that's holding on to moisture. So the way we stop that is, ooh, hold on, bakers. What did I do with my little jar of sugar here? What we do is we're going to sugar the top of the cake. And I know you're probably thinking, oh my God, isn't there enough sugar in that cake? Well, yes, but if you don't do this, it's not good. Okay, so if you were going to set this up for freezing, you would want to make sure that that you sugared. It makes it's like grit. so that your cake doesn't, gives it like a little bit of traction so it doesn't stick. The parchment paper has to be a little bit bigger than the cake. All right. And then, and you've seen me do this before, you're like, oh my God, that old chestnut. But I'm going to repeat myself. When you're removing parchment paper from the bottom of a baked cake, you want to peel it off on the diagonal. Okay? Now see, look, the parchment paper, which I greased with cake goo, our favorite cake goo, so we're not throwing cans of pan spray, any more cans of pan spray into the landfills. So this is the bloom of the cake. Now, the other thing, bakers, I was meticulous to make sure the parchment paper fit just in the bottom of the pan. So do not throw this away. Flip it over so that the clean side is now back on top of the cake. All right? You're going to pick it up. Ooh, shoot, it broke on me. That's not cool. You're going to pick it up. I'm going to use the paper, and you're going to flip it. Well, you know, look what happens when you're live. If you guys weren't here, this wouldn't have happened. But that's okay. I'm really happy you're here. Okay, that's all right. So I just flipped it back, and it's going to be a make it work moment, and it really helps you guys to see these make it work moments. So the reason we flip it over is that when we roll our sponge roll, the pretty non-caramelized side is on the outside, and the baked side is where we're going to spread our filling. All right? So let me see, any questions? Nope? All right. So you guys see what happened, right? Full disclosure, it ripped. I lost a corner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply trim to the rip, and my sponge roll is going to be a little bit shorter, and I'll have some nice cake crumbs in my freezer to use in whatever I need cake crumbs for, and sometimes, my bakers, you do need cake crumbs, or sometimes you just want a snack, so that's not a problem. All right. Knife, blade. Uh-oh. Now, whenever we cut something, make sure it's straight. I'm just going to trim this. And this gives me an opportunity to show you the texture with the matzah and the potato starch. Look at that. It looks it has a really beautiful crumb structure. It's really a lovely, lovely light cake. It doesn't look like anything but cake, and there's absolutely no flour in here. So it's pretty cool. All right, let's get rid of this, our little problem here. And I want you to be able to see what I'm doing, so I'm going to use jam. All right, you'll be able to see better with the jam. If you go to the recipe on the website, I use the dairy-free lemon curd. All right, so this is just Trader Joe's raspberry jam, nothing exotic. If you make your own jam, of course, use that. Please put it in the, if you make jam, put it in the comments. I've decided to make jam this summer. I've been hauling my canner with me for years, and it's time to break it out again. Strawberry jam, oh, the best. If you're a jam person, put it in the comments. Are you a jammer? All right, so what I did, and that took like no time at all, I put a thin layer of jam on a bottom edge, the two sides, and then I left a little space at the top edge. And you want to do this with all your fillings, because as you roll your sponge roll, you guys know this, my jelly rollers, that filling moves. So you want to have a bare space to accommodate, whoops, I'm losing my glasses, to accommodate that filling that's going to push forward. I think it's called physics. I think so. The other thing that you're going to have, I cannot recommend enough. Again, I repeat myself about this, my bakers. You're going to go to like the hardware store, get yourself a traditional yardstick and cut it in half. All right? And you'll see why in a second. All right, so now what we're going to do is I'm going to begin rolling. And this one is going to crack just a little bit, but not as bad as the thicker one. And there's lemon zest in the cake. And you don't have to do lemon. You can do orange. You could do lime. You could get super creative with this. But what I've done is I'm getting it going. Now it is cracking a little, but there's no fat in here. I could add 30 grams of melted butter to this particular formula and it would crack less, or margarine. But I've just been keeping it traditional. Now you notice I'm using the parchment paper to help me roll as I get toward the end. So here we are. Now I will say with the matzah, we get a little bit more of a bake. Let me just wipe down my table here. And then I've got one last thing to show you, which is super cool. So you saw the flip, and if you use the paper, I was being very cavalier, if you use the paper, you're not going to get a tear. You know, you just do it together, don't, you know, and don't go rogue like I did. Then you're going to take a clean piece of parchment paper. See this seam, bakers? I'm going to put it seam side down, and I'm going to position it a little bit close to the top, and I'm going to bring this parchment paper up. Ooh, I see questions and comments. I'll get them in a second. And where did I go? Oh, here I went. Okay. And then I'm going to fold up the bottom edge, tuck it around the roll. I'm going to leverage the half yardstick against the roll, and I'm pulling up on the bottom piece of parchment paper. Let me just go through that again. So here we are, we're up on the top half of the paper. I'm grabbing the bottom edge, bringing it up and over. I'm leveraging the yardstick in between the paper and the roll, picking up on the bottom edge, and I'm pushing down on the yardstick and pulling up with the bottom paper. And what that does is it evens everything out really, really beautifully. And then I'm going to take it, try not to obsess too much. I'm going to roll it tight. And then if you ever get like Christmas crackers at the holidays and they have the ends, you're going to twist the ends. Get yourself twisty ties or clips or bulldog clips. You're going to tighten the ends. You can wrap this in plastic wrap or foil. And then actually, if I'm just going to do a day, I just throw this in the freezer and I freeze it, and then, or just give it a good chill in the fridge, and then you're ready to roll. Minimum would be 4 hours. Maximum, it can live a month in the freezer if it's well wrapped. All right? So that is our Passover's, our lemon, I can't talk, our lemon sponge roll for Passover with matzah cake meal and potato starch. Oh, and by the way, potato starch is not ground up potatoes. That's potato flour. That's another show. Potato starch, they have rinsed the starch off the potato and they dehydrate it and grind it up. So there is a difference. They're not one and the same. Pistol Packing Mama. Oh, Life of Irony. Yep. JG, oh, I got some jam and jelly makers and marmalade makers. Pistol Packing Mama, that's a great suggestion. She suggested that I should have glued that with jam and rolled it anyway. You are correct. But you know, I think that inner baker, I didn't, yeah. My inner perfectionist was like yelling in my ear, how could you do that? Anyway, I digress. Bakers, it was a pleasure seeing you this Saturday. Please, if you have questions during the week, send me a message. Send me a message of your beautiful bakes. And I think for next week, remember Patty, our baker Patty, was asking about tarts. I was thinking maybe we would do a couple weeks on the different types of tart dough, like sweet tart dough, pâte sucrée, and the very sexy Italian pasta frolla, and talk about their differences and when we would use one over the other. And I can give you lots of tart tips while I'm talking about those specific doughs. Let me know if you'd like that. Send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. Until next week, happy baking, stay safe, and now your questions are answered, so you can go back into your kitchens and ready, set, bake. See you next week. Bye.